Okay, we are here for the Policy Committee meeting. Today is May 4th, and we will start off with Dr. Yanni. Do you have any announcements?
There are no announcements this evening.
Okay. Has the committee had a chance to look at the minutes from last month? We are
Yes.
okay to move those forward? Okay, terrific. We will move those forward. Next, we are looking at the discussion regarding Policy 601.
I will certainly welcome Mr. Leckman to step into this conversation here. At the last meeting, we talked about the purpose and efficacy of Policy 601, and there was a request that we look at our peer districts to see what, if anything, they have as a Policy 601. As we did that, what we really determined is that Policy 601 needs to be a number of policies that are pretty robust. So in the fall, we're actually going to be bringing you Policy 602, 603, and 604. So we'll be taking the big themes and topics from 601 and creating policies out of that. So I'll be working with Mrs. Ionity over the next couple of weeks to lay out what policies we'll be looking at and when, and you'll see 601 become 3 policies moving forward.
Okay, any questions or comments about that? Okay. Moving on, we will look at second readings. Starting with 608.
Did you want to start, Mr. Leckman?
Lost board docs here. All right, so policy 608 is bank accounts, and again, we didn't really make any changes here. So I think the big discussion last meeting was about getting quotation for banking services. So, you know, Dr. Yanni and I discussed that and said we can certainly just keep this in. I'm not so certain it's really even a policy that's required of the board to have after kind of looking around. But I think minimally, if anything, we would just talk about removing quotations for banking services as a final step here. And just note that the delegation responsibility is for the chief financial officer or designee to bring recommendations for banking services to the board for consideration.
Mark?
Is it the case, I think it is it the case in school code that the board has to approve banking services anyway?
The board has to approve all bank accounts before they can be utilized, yes. And that has to happen on an annual basis.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the authorization to obtain quotations is meaningless. I think it's fine to remove that. I don't even think it's a substantive change because I don't think it actually says anything. I'm not even sure the rest of it is necessary, but I'm fine with leaving it, or I'm fine with just striking the whole policy either way.
I think when we talk about comfort level, as we look at the sum total of the financial policies, the entire 600s, when we're done with that, I think we should come back, and I have a note in my file for next year to see if this becomes a policy that we should repeal at some point. But I mean, to your point, I don't think it hurts to have it.
The only reason I would advocate to keep it is for the reason Mark just said. The part of the policy that says we, by a majority vote of the full board, shall designate banks. So just to kind of have that out there as a policy, even though it's in code anyway, but it puts it out there for the community in a policy. But we can revisit it.
So just a small thing, if we decide to keep it, my only suggestion was in the purpose section to say it's how the district shall select and utilize bank accounts. That was it.
Okay, anyone else? No? Okay. 609.
609 is investment of district funds. Mr. Leckman, is there anything you want to draw our attention to?
I don't think so. Not from discussion at the last meeting, but I'll certainly take questions.
I do have some. It's not new language, but there's two bullets in here that, that I'm curious about. And I did send email to Andy earlier, so he would have a chance to look at it. The first is bullet 8, says district investment shall be made so as to limit the exposure of loss of principal due to market changes in interest rates. At first, I couldn't understand what that was for. I was, unless interest rates go negative, which is, theoretically possible, but in practice will never happen, you could never lose principal due to interest rates in the types of accounts that we use. Andy did point out this perhaps is really a restriction on interest rate swaps. And that makes sense. There have been districts in the past that have used interest rate swaps. I don't recall that we ever have, at least certain not in the time I've ever been paying attention. It is, it is an authorized thing to do, and it does risk your principal. I did some research into this after you pointed that out, Andy. The districts that have done this in the past have done it because they knew they were going to be, at least the districts I researched, they knew they were going to be borrowing over several years, and they wanted to hedge against the risk of interest rates rising over that period because they knew they could start while interest rates were low, but you never know by the end if interest rates are going to be low. If you're borrowing over 4 or 5 years or something like that. So they also, in addition to committing to that, they committed to interest rate swaps in order to basically be able to meter out their debt service over a longer period of time in a more predictable fashion. That makes sense. It didn't work out. The reason it got called to attention is because there are some districts for whom it really worked out quite badly, to the tune of $5 or $10 million or something like that of principal loss. My question is, the way the statement is written, it's not really enforceable. Like, it's not a hard rule here. It just says, so as to limit the loss. It doesn't say, don't risk your principal in a formal way. So my question is, do we want to leave it in that vague way, saying we don't really like that idea, but if it's really the right thing, we'll allow it? Do we want to say we don't allow it at all? And if we want to say we don't allow it at all, are we saying we're trying to block any kind of swap, any kind of derivative, or are we really talking specifically about interest rate derivatives, because that's kind of what it seems to be talking about? So, I don't know. That's where I am.
If you're asking me, I'm certainly fine making it explicit. I don't know that I would ever bring a recommendation to the board, or I would never make an investment on my own in a swap. I find it probably very unlikely that I would ever bring a recommendation to use public funds to invest in interest rate swaps. So I would be fine making that more restrictive if the board wants to do so.
Yeah, that's my instinct. I mean, it's effectively gambling with public money and in commodity and financial markets. And I don't, that doesn't, every other rule around how boards are allowed to manage their finances are extremely conservative and protective. So it's a little bit surprising to me that this is allowed. I'm okay with saying we won't do it, but if we're going to say we won't do it, I think it should say we won't do it.
Jeff, do you have a comment?
I'm fine with that.
Anyone else? Art?
Just a question. Do we see it in any other districts' policies where they specifically state that? I mean, can we look at that?
I mean, we certainly can. I know that the districts that were bitten by swaps, it says that. I think relying on Andy's recommendation, I think my comfort level is just to say we're not going to do swaps. And then at some point, if it becomes something that's attractive to do, although I don't think it ever will, this policy can always be brought back before the committee for revision.
We can
at
waive the
time.
policy at one time. Yeah, I agree that we should tighten up on that.
All right, so if we're tightening it up, are we tightening it up specifically around interest rate swaps, or are we talking about any kind of derivative? I mean, or just want to say, don't risk the principal is all we need to say. Maybe we don't need to say type of vehicle that you'd use to do that, and just, yeah. Lastly, I do think this is a substantive change. I think if we're going to make this change, it probably has to come back again.
Okay, any more comments?
It's already on my list to bring back in June, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got one. In the authority section, since we're bringing it back, we have the phrase, it says, "All investments of the district made by an officer and/or employee of the district." And I wonder if we should delete the phrase "made by an officer and/or employee of the district," because to me, it implies that someone else can make an investment, and I gotta believe that can't happen and shouldn't happen. And like belt and suspenders, if you look further in the policy, under restrictions, number 3, it says, "Unless the board specifically permits it, an investment must only be made by the following individuals: CFO, treasurer, secretary of the board if different." So I think we're covered there, and I just worry that that language in the authority sends a message we don't want to send.
I agree, just strike "made by an officer and/or employee of the district." Yeah, so it just says all investments of the district.
We're all in agreement with that? Art, did you want to add something? No?
All investments of district funds, even better, maybe? Investments aren't necessarily financial, I think although it is in the financial section, but.
We're okay with that. So this is, where are we with this one?
We're going to bring that back. It'll be a second reading in June.
I do have one more.
Okay.
Bullet 10 near the bottom. Then when district funds are invested in any one issuer other than designated depository accounts. And I asked Andy, I don't think this would ever happen. I actually don't think it can, because policy, I don't know, there's another, 608, which we just looked at, says no other depository shall be utilized. So I think to even have something in some other depository is already in violation of policy 608. I think we should just strike bullet 10.
And when Mr. Schroeder asked me this, I talked to Ms. Baldessano. We can come up with a scenario where this would ever apply.
Yeah, is there a case where it would apply or not?
No, I'm saying we could not come up with a scenario where this would apply, so.
Right.
Okay, any more on this policy? Jenna, go ahead.
Okay, so I've got a couple, I think, small things. I think we talked last time about striking the references to business administrator from paragraph 3 under restrictions. Okay, yep, good.
Oh, yeah.
The other one was, in paragraph 9, under other requirements, where is this? In the second sentence, it says, if after purchase, the rating of any instrument is reduced and no longer in compliance with this policy, the individual responsible for district investments, it may be kind of along the same lines of what Mr. Wallach was saying. I mean, should we be more specific in designating who that person is?
I think it's important that the board be advised. I don't know that it's important who advises
Who?
the board.
I guess we're specific elsewhere about who has that authority, right? Is that fair? That was my only concern. I think we are. Yeah, I mean, I guess what we're saying is it's specified in delegation of responsibility, so that's fair enough. And then I had one.
I think in general, in cases where we are authorizing someone to do something, it's important to note who we're authorizing, but when we're requiring someone to do something, it's not as important.
I had one other substantive comment then, which is paragraph 8 under permitted investments. So it's kind of this catch-all, kind of anything else. You know, I didn't know whether we want to have any requirement for us to approve this, just because it's a little bit of a catch-all. I mean, it was a thought I had. It's not a hill I'm gonna die on, but I didn't know whether we wanted to think about that.
Mr. Leckman, correct me if I'm wrong. The board would have to approve any financial transaction, every financial transaction.
Any investments that would be made are required to be reported to the board as part of the treasurer's report on a monthly basis. So I could see 8 potentially getting into, since you mentioned it, Act 10 is a new, not new, a newer investment option that school districts have that, but I would think if we would ever use Act 10, there is specific language that you would write directly into this policy. Act 10 allows investments in certain things beyond just CDs. It like gets into corporate bonds and things like that, that we could have access to. So it's allowable by school code. So this potentially would allow that. Personally, I would never make that type of investment without having specific Act 10 language in this policy. But I understand your concern.
Yeah, I mean, it would theoretically allow swaps, which we've explicitly disallowed elsewhere in this policy, but
So where do we stand with that? Do we want to,
I don't think that's, sorry, Jen.
Oh, sorry. I would, in light of what Mr. Leckman just added, I would probably now lean more toward having something that says we have to approve it.
I was going to say that I like the kind of the breadth of 8 because that's what's permitted if necessary under school code, and then we have restrictions and guidelines under it. If we wanted to add something saying we had to expressly approve, I'm fine with that too.
Mark, thoughts?
I guess my instinct is what I would want to happen if we were going to use an Act 10 investment or a swap or any of those kinds of things that are not the investments we already use and know about and are comfortable with. We would have a discussion at a finance committee meeting. And for that reason, I mean, if we want to explicitly say that here, or even just don't allow that and it has to come through the policy process before we can use such a thing, I'm okay with that too. I guess I would want to read through this policies with the idea in mind. Would it be possible for a chief financial officer to use something that would be granted by 8 without going through? Is there any way that the chief financial officer could use something authorized by bullet 8 without other board action? And my instinct is probably not, but I haven't read through it with that idea in mind. That's all it seems to be protecting against, or therefore, just effectively authorizing action without us. So we could strike it and make it have to go through the policy process. We could make it general so it doesn't have to go through policy, but it has to go through finance. Yeah, I mean.
Because I guess my concern is he could put it in the monthly report, but then we don't really vote on it, discuss it if it's in the monthly report. So the second option where it goes to the finance meeting, that's where I would be leaning.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. The way I read this, we're basically giving authority via this policy to invest in, any of 1 through 8. So to me, and to your point, Mark, I haven't looked whether there's something else that would specifically require, but I guess my point is it doesn't hurt to specify on this one. So if it comes before the finance committee or it requires specific approval, whatever, I just want to make sure there's a mechanism for awareness.
Jeff, you okay with that? Yeah. Anyone else on the board?
All right, so I think, why don't we leave, if this is coming back again, we can leave this to the administration to work up some language around that when we bring it back next time.
Okay.
$618 is student activity funds. Mr. Leckman?
I don't think we made any changes here, so happy to answer any questions if there are.
All right, no questions on this one. So we can move that one forward? Okay. Okay, so now we'll move on to first readings.
So 616, payment of bills, this is a function every month. The board gets a bills list. And other than, if you look on the second page of that policy, there were 7 items that were listed for, payment of bills. We changed the language there to match the register that the board sees every month. So other than that, Mr. Leckman, I don't know if there were any substantive changes that changed the policy as written. I should just point out too, I'm sorry, if I could just point out, we're at the point now in our policy book where most of the policies are up to date, so we're coming back on a 3-year cycle or just outside of a 3-year cycle. So if it seems like we're looking at policies with not a lot of changes, it's because the heavy lifting was done previously, and now it's, now it's just another pass of it.
Okay, any comments from the committee or the board on this policy? No, go ahead, Mark.
Just 2 really minor ones. One is in the purpose statement, the phrase "but at the same time." I don't like it. How about just while ensuring that due care has been taken? And, normally I send these separately, but I just noticed it. There's a typo in the total expenditure. The green. Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
While we're in the phrases I don't like column, under guidelines, all claims for payment shall be submitted. Claims for payment just struck me odd. Should we say invoices, bills? Just something to think about as we move it along.
Okay. Anyone else? Jenna, go ahead.
All right, so under authority, my suggestion was going to be, at the end of kind of the intro, you're saying, everything must be properly itemized, et cetera, and that the treasurer designee may pay out funds prior to the board having approved such payments. I would just add in the following circumstances, and then you have those 2 examples.
Okay. I'm seeing nods from the committee. Sounds good.
And I had a question on this one. Number 2 in that same section, what are agency account deposits? I just want to make sure I know what that refers to.
I don't believe we have any agency accounts currently, so, but there are specific accounts that would be classified as agency accounts. I believe that would be if we have like an OPEB account or something like that. So there's specific funds underneath the account code structure that would be termed agency accounts.
Okay, and then I think I had one other thing. So there are 2 other things, sorry. There are a couple references to business administrator, but more importantly, on the, where's this? This is under the guidelines, the list of bills shall include the following information. So the way it's been changed, it would just be check number, issue date, total expenditure. I would suggest putting description back in. I mean, I think we need some type of substantive information in there so we know what it's for.
So this is written based on the report that the board currently gets. So if we're adding things back in, we have to change the report that we get out of the system, and that would require, I'm not opposed, I'm just making you aware, it's not as easy as just clicking a button and saying, let's put this field back in our report. So, and description would just be a canned term right out of the system if we were able to do that.
I think in the rare case when anyone has had a question about any of the payments, which has been, in my time on the board, extremely rare, we can always ask.
Yeah, that's fair. That's all I had.
Okay. Do we want to add a definition of agency in this? Was that your term, Jenna? Was agency?
Yeah, agency account deposits. It's in authority number 2.
We can certainly do that.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on this policy? No? Okay. So we will send that to the legislative. Up next, 617.
So 617 is petty cash. As we continue to revise processes and move the business office forward, we may at some point bring this policy back to repeal it because we may look at a procurement card system. But we wanted to make sure that we reflected in this policy what we're doing with petty cash. We have strong controls in place. This policy outlines those. But I wouldn't be surprised this time next year if we're not bringing this back and repealing. Mr. Leckman, anything?
Nothing specifically to add, just to confirm that we, petty cash, it notes it in here, I believe in the AR, that there's a specific amount of $200. It's very small. It's not used on a regular basis, so this covers us, but certainly it would be my preference to not just have district cash out in the district, even though we have strong controls, so nothing more to add, but happy to answer questions.
Okay, any questions? Jeff?
Just a small question. In the authority section, we say permit use of petty cash in accordance with this policy and its associated administrative regulation. Are we calling out the AR expressly here because those safeguards are in the AR?
Yeah, so once the policy is approved, we'll put the AR together, and, I mean, we already have it written, but the AR specifically outlines the safeguards.
Okay, awesome. And then just a little thing under guidelines, the second sentence, appropriate uses of petty cash and safeguards shall be communicated by the superintendent and/or designee. Do we want to say shall be established and communicated, or just something to reinforce that it's both things?
Go ahead, Mark.
The thing that catches me on that one, if you're talking about communicating, we should say to whom. Presumably it's to the manager of the petty cash accounts. But that's all in the AR, and I don't know that the board needs to say that. I'm fine with that just being in the AR. I mean, I think just changing communicating to established and dropping communicated is even good enough for me, as thinking about what the board is saying versus what the administration needs to control.
Anything else? No? Anyone else? Okay. So we will send that to the legislative. And policy 709.
709 is building security. I just want to bring the board's attention to some language that has been stricken. So under the purpose, School District of Upper Dublin, it's one of our policies. We don't need to repeat the district's name. And in the authority section, video monitoring does not assure the elimination or prevention of unsafe incidents or inappropriate behavior. I looked at a number of other districts' policies. No one had that language in it. And also Act 44 that we're required to comply with for safety and security across the state also doesn't have that language in any of their recommendations. So I went ahead and struck that. Throughout the policy, it said multiple times that the superintendent shall promulgate administrative regulations. I think we only need to say that once. And then also, and I think this is a philosophical change that we made around monitoring custodial and maintenance operations. I think that's a philosophical difference between the administration, maybe that was, and the administration that's here. We should not be using security cameras to monitor employee performance. If there is an issue that we need to go back and look at footage, that's one thing, but we shouldn't be relying, we should be relying on administrators and leaders checking on people firsthand, not exercising the use of security cameras to do that. And then just as a discussion here, the items and the last page of the policy, that 1 through 6, some of our peer districts had that language moved into administrative regulations, and I wanted to pulse the committee on your thoughts about whether you wanted that to stay in the policy or to be moved to the administrative reg.
Comments?
I have a few. okay, let me start with this one. There's, it talks about keys and access cards. And I wonder if the policy should be so specific about the technology we're using for physical security, or should just talk about who is authorized to access district property, district facilities. The other thing, facilities in those sentences feels to me like it's limited to buildings. Is the field a facility? Is our property along Fort Washington Avenue, which is, completely unprotected by a fence or anything, is that a facility? I mean, I think I think we're talking about district property, district, I'm not sure what the word is. Facility just seems like not quite the word we mean.
I agree with you. I think it really is district property. The reason I didn't change it in all the Act 44 language, they refer to everything as a facility, even a field, even, open property. That doesn't preclude us, though, from saying district facility and property or something like that if we want to be a little bit more specific.
I think, I mean, we should, I'm all about, sticking with the language that they're using in code, but, yeah, that might be good. The other similar one, bullet number 2, video recording devices shall be used to, bullet 2, safeguard district equipment, safeguard district property. I mean, it's, unless, again, if Act 44 uses equipment.
Keep in mind that the folks that wrote Act 44 don't work in schools.
Also a good point. Review occurrences of vehicle damage in district parking lot seems oddly specific. Are we, yeah, I mean, like, yes, but what about, damage to other personal property on district property? That seems like something that we might use video recording for. So
We can make that more comprehensive for sure.
Yeah. And then on the move to AR question, most of this to me feels like board's statement rather than administration. I think there are little bits of it that could be moved to AR, and there is an AR, so, that's relatively easy to do, but things like if the board wants to establish that notification shall be annual about where video surveillance is, and I'm not sure if that might be in Act 44, then it should be here. If the board wants to say that video monitoring, I think it's okay for the board to be establishing that video monitoring is for use of district administration, will only be used, these seem like board statements to me.
And we can absolutely keep them here. I don't have a strong feeling that it should be moved to the AR. I think before this comes back for a second reading, though, we'll go through and broaden some of those statements. So we're talking about facilities and property, and we're not just talking about, for example, cars and parking lots, but making sure that that's
And then
broader.
the last one, another just old term, the last bullet says visual images being taped should be visual images being recorded.
Okay, other comments on this? Go ahead, Jenna. Oh, sorry, Jenna.
Oh, and I just noticed it's that visual images being recorded must be posted in locations where audio recording will be taking place. Written notices. Written.
Like you put a sign up.
Possible activation of any audio recording of conversation concurrent with a visual image being taped.
Yeah.
What's this say? I don't know what this
It's the
says.
Wiretap Act.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Janet, but while we're on this point, I was going to say, I think 6 has to be in policy because of that reason. And I guess I just wanted to make sure everybody was comfortable. It looks like, Dr. Yanni, we deleted a reference up above where it said ARs will regulate use of video recording devices and designated school facilities for the purpose of recording video images, but not audio recordings. And I think we're still okay deleting that as long as we have number 6 in the policy. And I think what it goes to, my understanding at least, is the Pennsylvania Wiretap Act, that unless everybody consents, you can't record somebody, Andy's nodding, I think I got this right, you can't record somebody's discussion or conversation unless they consent. So I guess the idea is that if we post a sign saying you're going to be recorded here, that gives us some cover on that. Is that enough, Andy, you think? Or or do we have to have something more than that?
I don't think that's sufficient for audio recording.
Yeah.
I think under the Wiretap Act, you have to actually have someone's consent. Although, if you think about a call that you have into a call center where they say, this conversation may be recorded, I mean, you could always hang up. So maybe a sign, maybe a sign is.
Sign means you could arguably not speak in that area, at least in theory. Dr. Young, it might be something we want to just bounce off the solicitor just to make sure we're not doing something inappropriate there.
So when we think about, we do not capture audio in any of our security camera footage, correct? I know it's correct. I know it's correct, because
Yeah, I think on some vehicles we may, but it's posted.
but it's posted, right. So that was my point. So like on a bus, if we have a camera, there is a posting that says, and that is, I'll make sure that that's in our student handbooks, but I know for a fact on transportation, there is notification that, but other than that, none of our security camera footage captures audio. The only thing that we are capturing audio, obviously, would be these meetings, and folks are notified via the agenda. There are times, and I don't think it needs to be in policy, but there'll be a contentious meeting, maybe a special education meeting where an advocate comes in and says, the advocate says, I'm going to record this meeting, everyone agrees, and then the district also records so that we have our own audio recording. But other than that, we don't capture audio.
Yeah, I'm thinking that maybe the Wiretap Act is notice of the recording, not consent. So that if you're going to record, you have to give the opportunity, you have to give them notice that you're going to record it, because you can always hang up the phone or you cannot talk. I don't believe it requires consent, so a sign would be sufficient.
Okay. Jenna, you got,
Okay, so, yeah, Mark, I literally had the same comment on the vehicle damage. I wrote, why is this one so specific? So, okay, so it sounds like we're going to make that one maybe a little bit more expansive. I think, so under that, where then you get into number 1 through 6, so we're going to need the intro back if we're not moving it into AR, that it's currently stricken, so that these, we need some kind of intro there. I know these regulations shall provide that, might not make sense, but we need some kind of intro back there. So on number 1, then, under there, staff, students, and parents will be notified in writing. The note I had here was, how do we do this and why? To Mark's point, I don't know if this is, in Act 44, I'm skimming it now, I don't see it. If it is in there, then I think we need to add that reference down to legal. So, I understand the sensitivity around the audio, but I don't know if you have to give people notification on an annual basis as to what buildings we might be using video surveillance. So if it's not required, I don't necessarily know why we're doing it. And then if we can backtrack to the purpose and authority. So the purpose statement, it didn't, I certainly agree with what's there, 100%. It didn't quite feel like a purpose statement to me. And the authority section, my guess is that we could, as we do in some other policies where we say, it is the responsibility of the board or whatever, it feels like there's probably something weightier we can put in there. So I'm sorry I don't have more specific thoughts there.
I think my instinct is that the reason any of this is here or was here in the past is to say, we're not going to do this willy-nilly, it's going to be done, in some sort of controlled fashion. I think that's really the purpose of the purpose and authority statements here. But I don't think it exactly says that, so, yeah.
go ahead, teacher.
I have one question. Under number 3 on the back page, it says video monitoring, blah, 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 and then it says well-being of students and staff and their property. Suddenly their property comes in, whereas everywhere else, it's just about safety. So is that intentional? Because I feel that is a step where if you're talking about locker rooms and other places where people put their stuff, we might be bridging into or stepping into an area that's a little tricky.
I may strike that language when we bring it back for a second reading. Because one of the things that, I mean, in our handbooks, for example, we say cell phones, bring them to school at your own risk. We're not responsible if something gets, so I think that's a good point. We can strike that.
Jeff?
But devil's advocate, number 4, where we had the vehicle damage, if we broaden that, that's property. So we got to think about being consistent there.
These are the reasons why video recordings may be used. It doesn't say we are
For the well-being.
trying to protect.
Okay.
It says, if we have a video recording, we can use it for this purpose. At least I think that's what it's trying to say. Is that not what it actually says?
No, I think you're right, Mr. Sirota. So I think.
Good point.
What, I'll take a look at this again, and if there's anything that doesn't seem like it fits there, we'll strike for second reading.
I have one more question. As Sandy Run is opening and we are embarking in potentially a whole new level of security and surveillance, is there anything in here that needs to be addressed? Or is there anything that's being implemented there that needs to be addressed here, or are we totally?
No, no, there's nothing.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe the teacher's point about property will be in the AR, like defining what you will use it for. And I just want to say, I do think that this is board language, like Mark said earlier, and we kind of just to sense there, that I think, yeah, we're telling the administration, like, this is what you can use it for. So that's my thoughts on that. Okay, any more comments on this policy? Are we all in agreement that that language should stay in board policy? Yes, yes, okay. All right, any more comments? All right, we can move on. We'll send that one to the legislative. And that brings us to public participation. As a reminder, you're being recorded.
Video surveillance. Ginny Vitella, Ambler. When I just listening to this conversation, when I think of, like, I'm a visitor, right? When I come into the building, I consider myself a visitor, right? But how about all our community access to this? I feel like we're not, I don't know if it has to be, but we rent out the spaces to outside community events, and surveilling them or video monitoring them. I wonder if that fits in here somewhere, that we're making sure that they're not doing anything wrong and we'll be videotaping them. And also that number 2 on the back, the safeguard district equipment, property. I mean, I don't know what we could add all of it, because to me, it's furniture. I mean, someone could come in and use our Performing Arts Center and potentially damage some of the furniture there, not just equipment or the facility itself. And I wonder if we add anything to 24/7. Because this building isn't just custodians after hours, it's a lot of groups. I mean, I've been here after hours for events and other things, so anyway, that's all.
Okay. I will close community comment, public participation, sorry.
I will check. I believe our rental agreements, when someone accesses a permit for a space, it's included there. And I'm 99.9% sure that does say that in those documents. And as far as 24/7, I think with the with the exception of the cameras on buses, I believe the remainder of our security cameras are 24/7.
I can't answer that with certainty, but I believe you're right. They don't get turned off and turned back on, so I would assume they're running 24/7.
We'll make sure, but I think, yeah, just the buses wouldn't be 24/7.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, the next policy committee meeting is Wednesday, June 1st at 7 p.m. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.